My name is Deepika Narula, and I work as a teacher of chemistry. And I have been teaching from like nearly 10 years now. And before teaching, I have worked in industry, in pharmaceutical industry. And I have uh, completed a PGC. That is when I started to teach. And I think I have worked in various state schools by now. I currently work at Beaumont School in Hertfordshire, and I work there as a teacher. And I quite like teaching because it's just a new challenge every single day, and that is not what I found in industry. So that is what a new challenge that keeps me going in teaching. I think I came to here on an inset day that was done 2 or 3 years ago. 3 years ago, probably. I can't. Just before pandemic, that February of when pandemic happened. It was, I think, in 2019. So we had an inset, and we had a speaker. I think it was Oliver Caviglioli who came to speak on that inset day, and my school, uh, like they they are a lead in facilitating CTeach, and so they told us about that this is a new qualification, and you can become research informed with this qualification. And there was already a teacher who has done in our school in the first. So in the first cohort, there was a maths teacher in our school who has completed CTeach. So that is when I first heard about it. At that time, I was completing nearly 8 years of teaching, but I always felt that whenever I was having discussions during my observations or after my observation, I would just not have enough knowledge to agree or disagree with what feedback I was being given, and I would just nod my head along and go on. While I was doing targets for my appraisal for or looking for professional development, I felt uh, I I do not know where I want to go, what I want to improve, and I was basically clueless, and I would go with whatever my line manager would tell me or whatever my school would tell me to do. For example, we did started to do retrieval in lessons, but I was clueless about what is retrieval, why I am doing this, how will it benefit my students. And I felt like I'm doing all these things, but having no kind of basic knowledge, or that was, I was not a lack of confidence as well. Even though I was an experienced teacher, I know my subject really well, but I lacked confidence if I had to talk to any colleague. And I think I felt like by doing chartered teacher state course, I might become a little bit confident. I might become a little bit better teacher. So these were my ideas going in my head. I also felt like I never enjoyed CPD. I never enjoyed going to inset. I never enjoyed going to a whole day course, because I felt either they were not relevant to my subject, or if I went on an A level chemistry course, I felt like I kind of knew all these things, but how will I implement? When will I have time to implement in my day to day teaching? I never did. So that was going in my mind, that maybe through this charter teacher status I might do that. And I never really engaged with research. I did some assignments during my PGC, but it was just completing the assignment. Whereas now I wanted to know, like, okay, if there is a research, if can that research really be used in the class, or will it help me to become a better teacher or more research informed? Will it have an impact on my students? Will it have an impact on my teaching? So because I'd never enjoyed, if I went to a CPD session or an inset session, if an English teacher is talking about how they have implemented something, I would struggle. How will I implement in my science, in my subject? Now, there is not one thing I will pinpoint that I enjoyed the most. There are many things that I enjoyed. And I think the first thing is reading. I felt I'm not a reader. I don't enjoy. I'm more of an active person. I never enjoyed reading. Uh, so for me, I was a little bit scared. How will I engage in reading? And English is not my first language. So I was like, how will I engage in reading? But when I started reading books, I picked up books which were easy to read. And I find that if it has less educational jargon, I would engage with them. And honestly, I did not had any trouble in engaging with those because there are plenty of books that many teachers have written. One thing I really enjoyed was deliberate practice, because that was something that I was doing with my classes while I was teaching. So I did not have to pick up any specific topics. It was whatever I was teaching along the scheme of work, wherever that assignment came, it was like rigorous practice over 6 weeks. And I think that is where I realized that, okay, if I read about something, how I can implement it in my lessons, how can I become better at it? And how can I be expert? So what I chose was I chose activating prior knowledge and guided practice and modeling. And I was sure like I am doing these, but what changed for me was in activating prior knowledge, I was activating prior knowledge of everyone. I am not going with one or two students. When I was modeling, I was modeling I was making sure that all those implicit steps that I am assuming students would know, I am actually going into a lot of detail and explaining each. I was breaking down a topic. And in guided practice, as I did not find many examples, I had to work a little bit on making examples of guided practice. And I think now if I am introducing any new topic, I think about these steps automatically. And all I did was sat down and spent some time thinking about what prior knowledge students should have by this point. If they don't have it, how will I activate it? Usually I used mini whiteboards, and I used the online version as well because I did a lot of it during lockdown. And how I have used those tools and how I am making sure that everybody's knowledge is activated. What are my next steps? If I am modeling, am I explaining maybe step one or step two? So I would actually write down in steps on a piece of paper and then plan my lessons. And what I felt was when I did that cycle, 2 cycles of deliberate practice, I had to record myself. I had to listen to what I am doing, how I am doing. And then I had feedback from my mentor, and there was a SLT member who is engaged, who is head of teaching and learning. They gave me feedback, and based on those feedback, I improved in the next cycle. And I think I was surprised that I actually can engage with research. And just by reading, I had like not many examples, but I was surprised that if I worked hard enough, I can actually change some things in my lessons and make them even more engaging or better for students where they can learn. And I think what I felt was when I was reading and engaging with educational research, some of my beliefs were challenged. Some of my beliefs that, okay, show them an animation and students will learn. And maybe if they are taking pretty notes, because these were what my students were doing, I would ask them to take notes while I was showing an animation. But uh, engaging with cognitive load theory made me realize that their working memory might be overloaded. So I was making sure that whatever I am reading, I am implementing that in my lesson. And what was good about chartered teacher course is that you are introduced as assignments different concepts at different points. So you are taking ownership of your what you want to improve. So what your focus is, you choose. And I think that is really powerful for me, because I could pick on what I want, because there is so much stuff. So you can't do retrieval and other things along with interleaving and spacing. But the way the course is designed, you are picking various things at various points and then implementing them in your lessons. So I think deliberate practice, definitely, I would say, engaging with research, educational research, and reflective journals as well. I think I, I I was doing it wrong. When I was doing reflective journals, I was looking at how much my students are learning, but they are more about what how you are changing your practice, how your beliefs are being challenged. So that was, for me, these were the main highlights. Most of the time it was feedback from in deliberate practice section, it was feedback from the my mentor. So that was one way, so during observations, as I would say. And when I would say improvement, I started noticing um, changes in engagement in the class. For example, I can give you some examples. Like I was not confident in doing checking for understanding. And when I started reading books, they mentioned cold call. And if I in cold calling, what you do is you randomly pick a student to answer in your class. I think I wasn't doing that. I was going with students who would put their hands up. I would take an answer and move on. When I started doing cold calling, I realized that some students have not even listened to my question. And if I have asked them, they would be like, "Oh, miss, can you repeat the question?" And for another example would be, if you have posed a question, giving them wait time. And I would count on my fingers, like 1 2 3, like just in my head, giving them wait time and then asking a response. uh, I also had, because I teach in a state school, and because of COVID as well, and some students sometimes have SEN needs, some are anxious, they don't want to respond in the class. In the past, I would have never challenged them on a, to answer a question. But what I started doing was I started doing choral response. Choral response is where you ask a question and the class will give you an answer on 3 2 1. And what I noticed was I had chats with students who are either anxious or have some ASEAN needs, who don't want to talk to me in the class. I would go to them maybe after a lesson. I have spoken to them and I was like, I am not picking up on you, but I need to know what is going in your mind. And over the course of the year, I started noticing that they started putting their hand up, which was such a positive thing for me. And sometimes how my practice changed was because I was not checking for understanding. If I am explaining a graph, I would go with that students are understanding it. But when I started questioning them, when I started using probing questions and not with one or two students, but with a sample of them. So, for example, 4 or 5 of them, I realized when I was explaining a graph, there was a plateau. And they, so plateau means whatever the variable is, it is not changing. They thought it is changing. So I had to go back and explain. Lot of misconceptions propped up because I was not I was just teaching them and not checking for understanding. So that is where I think I have gone better, that I am better in checking for understanding. Obviously I have just finished my charter teacher course and I have not seen, like, measured the impact of it in terms of scores, but I am better in what we say formative assessment. I can see where the gaps are and where to take the learning from there on. Rather than just focusing on grades, what I am focusing on is, are my students engaged in the lesson? If I am addressing their gaps, are the misconception less? And is their engagement in the lessons more, along with the subject as well? And are they asking me questions? For me, it is really important that they ask me questions. They are not scared of me. They ask me questions if they are not clear. And I think these are the things that are happening more. Sometimes I give them more reflection time in the class if they have answered any questions. Sometimes I ask them, okay, rate your understanding before even attempting how well you will do this question. And once they have attempted a set of quizzes, I'll ask them, okay, what do you think? Did you, whatever you thought you will able to answer correctly, have you done that? If not, think about why not. And I have often had conversations with students where they are telling me that, oh, I actually thought this, and it is not. For example, I was doing a lesson with year sevens on reproduction, and I gave them some questions, and they talked to me about that. Oh, miss, I thought I know the function of uterus, but I have realized I don't know it. So these are the conversations. If I have explained the concept, and if usually what I use is, there is a best resources, they have diagnostic multiple choice questions. After a new topic or new concept, or after a few lessons, if I test them on a question, what I am experiencing is they are thinking deeper. And since I start taking answers from them, like sample of answers, okay, what do you think is that, they are having conversations with me about, oh, I thought it is this, or they're explaining to me that how their thinking process is changing as well. And I think for me that is even more important than grades, that my students are able to talk to me about their misconceptions. And I think looking at grades is a long term process, because they sit GCSE after probably 5 years of secondary school. For me, it is more important that they are addressing, I am approachable, and they can approach me and talk to me about their problems. In general, what I think is, teaching is such a dynamic profession. When we are in a classroom, there are so many things going on, and if you are teaching 6 or 7 lessons every day, in my personal experience, I think you can slag down. You can find the easier ways. And what you can do is, you can fall into bad habits. Having a longer CPD is, I think this was recommended by, I think the first thing I read was Teaching Toolkit, something like that. There were 2 documents that I read, and in one of them, it mentioned something like CPD has to be a long term. It can't be just a day or a week. It has to be longer, which is something like charter teacher course. Because when you are engaged in professional development for a long time, you have time to think and reflect. And reflection is a very important part of teaching profession. And personally, what I think is, as a teacher, you have tendency to fall into bad habits. Having that time to reflect will help you improve your teaching and avoid those, falling into those bad habits. I have already recommended to my colleagues, and even to teachers in other departments, because often teachers come and ask me, how did you find it? So I say that it is hard work, but it is worth it. I think the charter teacher pathway has changed as well. When I did it, it was like just one whole 18 months course. Now they have split it into sections, and I think with that, more teacher can engage, because they can dip in and dip out. So they can maybe commit for 3 months, complete one part, and then maybe decide whether they want to do other parts or not, or they can pick what they want to choose, what they want to do before completing the full chartered teacher status. So I think the way course has changed is, it has become more, teachers will find it more approachable, and they might engage with it more.